The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, and through my peephole, I saw the two people I had successfully avoided for 3 years. My mother Sandra stood there with my 28-year-old brother Marcus, both wearing expressions that screamed entitlement. In her manicured hands was a printout of my tax return, information she had no business possessing. My stomach dropped as I realized someone had betrayed me, leaking my six-figure software engineering salary to the family that had written me off as worthless. Before we dive into this family betrayal story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button if you have ever dealt with toxic family members who suddenly show interest when money is involved, and do not forget to subscribe because this story has twists that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about blood loyalty versus chosen family. 3 years earlier, I had made the painful decision to cut contact with my family after years of emotional abuse and financial manipulation. My mother, Sandra, had always favored Marcus, my older brother, who could do no wrong, despite being a perpetual failure at everything he attempted. While I worked 2 jobs to put myself through community college and later transferred to finish my computer science degree, Marcus lived rent-free in our childhood home, bouncing between get-rich-quick schemes and blaming everyone else for his failures. The final straw came when I discovered that my mother had been forging my signature on credit applications, destroying my credit score to fund Marcus's latest business venture, a food truck that failed within 6 months. When I confronted her, she claimed I owed the family for raising me and that successful children had obligations to support their struggling siblings. The gaslighting was so intense that I questioned my own memory of events, but the evidence was undeniable. I had spent the last 3 years rebuilding my life in Seattle, far from their toxic influence in Phoenix. I changed my phone number, moved without leaving a forwarding address, and even went by my middle name, Brooklyn, instead of my first name, to make myself harder to find. The healing process was slow but transformative. I found genuine friendships, excelled in my career as a software engineer at a tech startup, and for the first time in my life experienced what healthy relationships look like. My company had recently gone public, and my stock options had vested, making my annual income jump from $60,000 to nearly $200,000. I had been careful about my privacy, using a post office box for sensitive mail and keeping my social media presence minimal. The only people who knew my real income were my accountant, my lawyer, and my best friend Jessica, who had become like a sister to me. Standing at my front door that morning, I felt the familiar knot of anxiety that my family always triggered. Sandra looked older but still maintained her perfectly styled appearance that masked her manipulative nature. Marcus had gained weight and bore the soft look of someone who had never faced real consequences for their actions. His presence beside her told me everything I needed to know about why they were here. "Brooklyn, sweetheart, we need to talk," Sandra said with that fake sweet voice she used when she wanted something. "We know you are doing well for yourself, and family is family. We have some financial challenges that you could easily help with." I kept the door chain locked and spoke through the crack. "How did you find me? And how do you know anything about my finances?" Marcus stepped forward with his usual cocky attitude. "Does it matter? The point is, you have been selfish long enough. Mom showed me your tax return, 200 grand, and you have been living like this while we struggle. That is messed up, Brooklyn." The tax return comment hit me like a physical blow. Only 3 people had access to that information, and I trusted 2 of them implicitly. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to understand how this violation of my privacy had occurred. The betrayal felt deeper than just the invasion itself. It meant someone I trusted had either deliberately or carelessly exposed my most sensitive information to the very people I had worked so hard to escape. "I do not know how you got that information, but this conversation is over," I said, starting to close the door. Sandra wedged her foot in the gap and her mask slipped, revealing the cruel expression I remembered so well. You little brat. You think you can just abandon your family? Marcus needs $50,000 for a new business opportunity. You probably spend that on shoes. Actually, I need 75,000, Marcus corrected. 50 for the business and 25 to catch up on some debts. Come on, Brooke. You won, not even miss it. The entitlement was staggering. They had not spoken to me in 3 years, had never apologized for the financial abuse, and now they were demanding money as if I owed them something. But what disturbed me most was the tax return. Someone had given them access to my most private financial information, and I needed to find out who. Leave or I am calling the police, I said firmly. Sandra laughed bitterly. Go ahead, call them. We are your family asking for help. What are you going to tell them, that you are too selfish to help your own mother and brother? After they finally left, I sat in my living room shaking. The sense of violation was overwhelming. Not only had they tracked me down despite my careful precautions, but someone had betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way. I picked up my phone and called my accountant first. Richard, I need to know who has accessed my tax information. Someone gave my family details about my income. His voice was immediately concerned. Brooklyn, I can assure you it was not from our office. We have strict privacy protocols. Have you considered that it might have come from your lawyer's office during the estate planning process? My lawyer, Patricia, was equally adamant that the leak had not come from her firm. That left only one possibility, and it made my stomach turn. Jessica was the only other person who knew the specifics of my financial situation. We had discussed it extensively when I was deciding whether to exercise my stock options early. The thought that Jessica might have betrayed me felt impossible. She had been my closest friend for 2 years, the person who had helped me heal from my family trauma. She knew better than anyone how hard I had worked to escape their toxic influence. But as I replayed recent conversations, small details began to stand out. Her questions about my income had seemed natural at the time, but now they felt different. Her encouragement to reconnect with family, which I had attributed to her close relationship with her own parents, took on a more sinister tone. I needed proof before I could accept that my best friend had sold me out to the people who had destroyed my credit and emotional well-being. The violation felt almost worse than my family showing up because I had chosen to trust Jessica. My family had always been toxic, but Jessica was supposed to be different. She was supposed to be the family I chose. The next morning, I called in sick to work and began investigating how my private information had been leaked. I started by securing my finances, changing passwords, and setting up fraud alerts on all my accounts. If my family was desperate enough to track me down after 3 years, I needed to protect myself from any potential financial sabotage. My first real clue came from an unexpected source. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door around noon, holding a small package that had been delivered to her address by mistake. As she handed it over, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Oh, and dear, that young woman who was here last week asking about you seemed lovely. She said she was planning a surprise for your birthday. I hope I did not spoil anything by mentioning your work schedule. Jessica had been to my apartment complex asking questions about me. My birthday was not for 6 months. The pieces started falling into place, but I needed more evidence before I could confront her. I decided to set a trap. I texted Jessica asking if she wanted to meet for coffee, and during our conversation, I would feed her false information to see if it made its way back to my family. But first, I needed to understand the scope of what she had shared and why. That afternoon, I drove to our usual coffee shop and found Jessica already waiting with her typical bright smile. She looked genuinely happy to see me, which made the situation even more confusing. If she had betrayed me, she was either an excellent actress or genuinely believed she had done nothing wrong. Brooklyn, you look stressed. Everything okay at work? She asked, giving me a hug that now felt tainted. I sat down and decided to test the waters carefully. Actually, I have been dealing with some family drama. My mother and brother showed up at my apartment yesterday. Jessica's expression shifted slightly, a micro expression of what looked like guilt before she composed herself. Oh no, how did they find you? I thought you had cut all contact with them. That is what I am trying to figure out. Someone gave them my tax information. They knew exactly how much I made last year. I watched her face carefully as I said this. There was a flicker of something, fear, maybe guilt, but she recovered quickly. That is awful, Brooke. Who would have access to that kind of information? Her response felt rehearsed, and I noticed she avoided eye contact when she said it. I decided to push further. I have been thinking about it, and only 3 people knew the exact details of my income. My accountant, my lawyer, and I let the sentence hang. And me, she finished quietly. Brooklyn, you cannot seriously think I would tell your family anything. You know how I feel about what they did to you. But even as she said it, I could see the cracks forming in her facade. Her hands were shaking slightly and she kept glancing toward the exit. Jessica, I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you had any contact with my family? The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours. Finally, she broke. It was not supposed to happen like this, she whispered. Your brother contacted me on social media about 6 months ago. He said your mother was sick and they just wanted to reconnect with you. He seemed genuinely worried about the family relationship. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my voice steady. And you believed him. He was very convincing, Brooklyn. He talked about how much they missed you and how they had changed. He said they just needed to know you were okay and successful. I thought maybe it would be good for you to reconcile. So you gave them my address and my financial information. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I did not give them your address. I swear, I just confirmed that you were doing well financially when he asked. I thought it might make them proud of you. What exactly did you tell him? She looked down at her hands. He asked if you were successful in your career, and I said yes, very successful. He asked if you were making good money, and I said you had done really well with your company going public. I might have mentioned the general range of your income. The casual way she admitted to sharing my most private information was almost worse than the betrayal itself. She genuinely seemed to believe she had done nothing wrong. Jessica, they did not come to reconnect. They came to demand money. $75,000. They had a printout of my tax return. Her face went pale. I never gave them your tax return. I do not have access to that. But you gave them enough information to know what to look for and where to find it? The reality was setting in for both of us. Jessica had been manipulated by Marcus, who was far more cunning than I had given him credit for. He had played on her natural desire to see families reconciled, knowing she came from a loving family herself and could not fully comprehend the toxicity of mine. Brooklyn, I am so sorry. I thought I was helping. Marcus made it sound like they had changed, like they were genuinely worried about you. Did he ask for anything else? Any other information about me? She nodded miserably. He asked about your apartment complex, what area of the city you lived in. I thought he just wanted to make sure you were in a safe neighborhood. I did not give him your exact address, but I mentioned the general area. It was enough. Marcus had taken that information and done his own detective work to track me down. Combined with the financial details Jessica had provided, he had everything he needed to plan their ambush. There is something else, Jessica said quietly. He has been messaging me regularly asking for updates about you. I have not responded to most of them, but he knows we are close friends. This meant Marcus had an ongoing source of information about my life. Even if I changed my address again, as long as Jessica was in contact with him, they would be able to find me. I need to see the messages, I said. Jessica reluctantly pulled out her phone and showed me the conversation thread. What I saw made me realize that this was not just a simple case of family manipulation. Marcus had been conducting what amounted to a surveillance operation on me, using Jessica as an unwitting informant. His questions were specific and strategic, designed to build a complete picture of my life habits and vulnerabilities. The betrayal was worse than I had imagined, but now I had information that could help me turn the tables. Marcus thought he was being clever, but he had left a digital trail that could be used against him. More importantly, I now understood that this was not going to end with a simple confrontation. My family was not going to give up easily, and I needed a plan to protect myself permanently. After seeing the extent of Marcus's manipulation and surveillance, I realized I was dealing with something far more serious than simple family greed. This was a calculated campaign to exploit me financially, and it would not stop until I took decisive action. I needed allies, evidence, and a strategy that would end this permanently. My first step was to document everything. I took screenshots of Jessica's conversation with Marcus, noting how his questions had evolved from seemingly innocent inquiries about my well-being to specific requests for financial information. The pattern showed clear intent to commit what could legally be considered harassment and potentially fraud. Jessica sat across from me in the coffee shop, tears streaming down her face as the full scope of her manipulation became clear. "Brooklyn, I feel so stupid. Looking at these messages now, I can see how he was using me. What can I do to fix this?" I was angry, hurt, and felt betrayed, but I also recognized that Jessica had been a victim of Marcus's manipulation too. Her genuine remorse and willingness to help me fight back would be more valuable than cutting her off completely. "You can help me by doing exactly what I tell you to do," I said firmly. "Marcus thinks he has an inside source. We are going to use that against him." I outlined my plan. Jessica would continue responding to Marcus's messages, but now she would be feeding him false information designed to lure him into making bigger mistakes. Meanwhile, I would be building a case that could involve law enforcement if necessary. That evening, I contacted my lawyer, Patricia, to discuss my legal options. What I learned was both encouraging and disturbing. Marcus's behavior potentially constituted several crimes, including identity theft, harassment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The fact that he had somehow obtained my tax return suggested he might have committed federal crimes. "Brooklyn, you need to file a police report," Patricia advised. "Even if they cannot prosecute immediately, having official documentation of harassment will help if this escalates. Also, I recommend hiring a private investigator to determine how they got your tax return." The private investigator, a former police detective named Sarah Williams, was expensive but thorough. Within 48 hours, she had traced the source of my tax information leak. The answer shocked me. "Your brother has been dating a woman named Amanda Rodriguez, who works as a clerk at an IRS processing center," Sarah explained during our meeting. "She has access to tax records and has been feeding him information on multiple people, not just you. This is a federal crime and there are other victims." The scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise was staggering. He had not just targeted me. He had been using his girlfriend's position to identify high-income individuals for various scams and manipulations. I was just one of many victims, which explained how he had become so sophisticated in his approach. Armed with this information, I contacted the IRS fraud hotline and the FBI. What I thought was a family drama had evolved into a federal investigation. The agents were very interested in my case because it provided evidence of an ongoing conspiracy involving government employee corruption. Meanwhile, Jessica had been feeding Marcus false information about my supposed financial troubles and upcoming business trip. According to our fabricated story, I was about to lose a significant amount of money on a failed investment and would be out of town for 2 weeks. The goal was to see if he would attempt to break into my apartment or commit other crimes while he thought I was vulnerable. 3 days into our operation, Marcus took the bait. He messaged Jessica asking for more details about my financial problems and whether I might be more willing to help family now that I was supposedly struggling. More importantly, he asked about my travel dates and whether I had any valuable items in my apartment. He is planning something, I told Sarah during our daily check-in. The questions about my apartment contents and travel schedule are not coincidental. Sarah nodded grimly. We need to be ready. I have already coordinated with local police, and they are prepared to respond quickly if he attempts anything. But Brooklyn, I want you to consider staying somewhere else while we let this play out. I refuse to be driven from my home again. Instead, we set up surveillance equipment and coordinated with my building's security. If Marcus was planning to break into my apartment, we would catch him in the act. The waiting was the hardest part. Every noise in the hallway made me jump, and I found myself constantly checking the security cameras. But on day 5 of my supposed business trip, our patience was rewarded. At 2 in the morning, building security called to report that someone was attempting to break into my apartment. I was staying at Jessica's place nearby, and we could see everything through the remote security feed. Marcus and another man I did not recognize were using lockpicks to try to gain entry. The police arrived within minutes, catching them red-handed. As they were arrested, I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Marcus was my brother, and despite everything he had put me through, seeing him in handcuffs was painful. But the arrests were just the beginning. Amanda Rodriguez, Marcus's girlfriend at the IRS, was arrested the next day as federal agents raided her home and office. They found evidence of the larger conspiracy, including tax records for dozens of other victims. The federal investigation moved quickly once Amanda started cooperating. She provided details about other schemes Marcus had been running, including identity theft, tax fraud, and extortion attempts against other high-income individuals. What I had thought was a personal family issue was actually part of a criminal enterprise that had been operating for over 2 years. My mother, Sandra, was arrested 3 days later when investigators discovered she had been helping to launder money from Marcus's various schemes through fake charity organizations she had set up. Her surprise and protests of innocence were unconvincing given the extensive paper trail investigators uncovered. As the scope of their crimes became clear, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with grief. These were not the people I had tried so hard to reconnect with in my younger years. They were criminals who had been exploiting others long before they came after me. Jessica proved to be invaluable during this period. Her remorse over being manipulated was genuine, and she threw herself into helping build the case against Marcus. She provided detailed records of their communications and testified about his manipulation tactics. Seeing her fight to make amends helped me begin to forgive her role in the initial betrayal. The investigation also revealed something that explained a lot about my childhood. Marcus and my mother had been running smaller scams for years, including the credit card fraud they had committed in my name. It was not a desperate mistake, it was part of a pattern of criminal behavior that predated my success. Brooklyn, you need to understand that you were never the problem in that family. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, explained during an emergency session. You were raised by people who view relationships as opportunities for exploitation. Your success and independence threatened their control, which is why they became so aggressive when they found you. In the therapy sessions helped me process the complex emotions of watching my family face criminal prosecution. I felt guilty for feeling relieved, angry about the years of manipulation, and sad for the family relationships I had never really had. But I also felt something I had never experienced before: the power of chosen family. Jessica's dedication to making amends. Patricia's fierce protection of my legal interests, Sarah's professional competence, and even Dr. Martinez's therapeutic support showed me what healthy relationships looked like. As we moved toward the trial phase, I realized that this experience, as traumatic as it had been, was also liberating. I was no longer running from my family or wondering if I was being too harsh in my judgment of them. The legal system was validating what I had always known. They were toxic, criminal, and dangerous. The question now was what would happen next and whether justice would truly be served. Would you like me to continue with parts 5, 6, and 7? This story is building toward a powerful climax and resolution with the collapse of the criminal enterprise and Brooklyn's complete vindication. The trial began 6 months after Marcus's arrest, and what unfolded in the courtroom was beyond anything I could have imagined. The federal prosecutors had built an airtight case that revealed the true scope of my family's criminal enterprise. What started as my personal story of family betrayal had become the centerpiece of a major federal fraud investigation. Amanda Rodriguez, Marcus's girlfriend from the IRS, had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony revealed that Marcus had been blackmailing her for over 2 years, threatening to expose their relationship to her supervisors unless she provided him with tax information on high-income individuals. She broke down on the witness stand as she described how he had gradually escalated his demands from simple income verification to full tax returns for multiple victims. He told me it was just to help his sister who had abandoned the family, Amanda testified through tears. But then he wanted information on her neighbors, her co-workers, anyone who might have money. When I tried to stop, he said he would destroy my career and my family. The prosecution presented evidence that Marcus and my mother had targeted over 30 individuals using the stolen tax information. Their schemes ranged from sophisticated identity theft to elaborate long-lost relative scams. They had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from victims across multiple states. What devastated me most was learning about my mother's role as the mastermind. Sandra had not been the reluctant accomplice I had imagined. Phone records and financial documents showed she had been orchestrating the entire operation using Marcus as her primary operative while maintaining plausible deniability. Sandra Thompson created a network of shell companies and fake charities specifically designed to launder stolen money, the prosecutor explained to the jury. She exploited her son's girlfriend's access to federal tax records and turned family relationships into criminal conspiracies. When my mother took the stand in her own defense, she tried to paint herself as a victim of Marcus's manipulation. But under cross-examination, her true nature emerged. She showed no remorse for the victims they had defrauded, instead focusing on how the investigation had destroyed her reputation in the community. My daughter turned her back on her family, she said, looking directly at me. All we wanted was for her to help us during a difficult time. She could have prevented all of this by just being a good daughter. The audacity of her victim blaming was breathtaking. Even facing federal charges, she was still trying to manipulate the narrative to make me responsible for her choices. Several jurors visibly reacted to her callousness, and I could see the prosecution team exchange satisfied looks. Marcus's defense strategy was equally disturbing. His lawyer argued that he was mentally ill and had been influenced by our mother's manipulation since childhood. While there might have been truth to the psychological damage Sandra had inflicted on both of us, it did not excuse his deliberate choice to commit federal crimes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Marcus's attorney argued, my client is also a victim here. He was raised by a woman who taught him that family loyalty meant breaking the law. He never learned healthy boundaries or appropriate behavior. But the prosecution was ready for this defense. They presented evidence showing that Marcus had been planning these schemes independently, including detailed notes about potential victims and calculated risk assessments for different types of fraud. This was not the behavior of someone acting impulsively or under another's influence. The most damaging evidence came from Marcus's own phone and computer. Investigators had found extensive records of his surveillance activities, including photographs he had taken of my apartment building, detailed notes about my work schedule, and even recordings of conversations with other victims' family members. The defendant conducted systematic stalking and surveillance of multiple victims, the prosecutor stated. This was not family drama or mental illness. This was organized crime. When I took the stand as a witness, I felt the weight of years of manipulation and abuse. But I also felt powerful in a way I never had before. For the first time in my life, I was in a courtroom where the truth mattered and where my family's gaslighting tactics had no power. I testified about the years of financial abuse, the credit card fraud they had committed in my name, and the emotional manipulation that had driven me to cut contact with them. I described finding them at my door with my private tax information and their demands for money. They did not come to reconcile or apologize, I told the jury. They came to collect what they believed they were owed. In their minds, my success belonged to them. During cross-examination, Marcus's lawyer tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her struggling family, but years of therapy had prepared me for these tactics. I did not abandon my family, I responded calmly. I escaped an abusive situation. There is a difference between family loyalty and enabling criminal behavior. The defense's attempts to make me appear cold or selfish backfired spectacularly. The jury could see the contrast between my composed factual testimony and my family's emotional manipulation tactics. The most shocking revelation came during the prosecution's rebuttal phase. They presented evidence that my mother and Marcus had been planning to escalate their harassment of me if their initial demands for money had been refused. Phone records showed they had discussed kidnapping, home invasion, and even violence as potential next steps. The defendants had crossed every line, the prosecutor argued in closing statements. They violated federal law, exploited a government employee, stalked multiple victims, and planned escalating violence. This was not family dysfunction. It was organized crime with family members as both perpetrators and targets. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both Marcus and my mother. Amanda received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation, but she still faced 2 years in federal prison and permanent disbarment from government employment. As the verdicts were read, I watched my mother's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally a cold calculation that chilled me. Even in defeat, she was already planning her next move. Marcus looked genuinely shocked, as if he had never considered that there might be real consequences for his actions. The sentencing phase would come later, but the maximum penalties they faced were staggering. Marcus could receive up to 20 years for his role in the conspiracy, while my mother faced even longer due to her leadership role and the scope of the criminal enterprise. As we left the courthouse that day, Patricia put her hand on my shoulder. "Brooklyn, you did more than get justice for yourself today. You stopped them from hurting dozens of other people." But even with the guilty verdicts, I knew this was not over. My mother's expression as she was led away in handcuffs promised that she would find new ways to try to destroy my life. The legal victory was just the beginning of what I suspected would be a longer battle for true freedom from their toxicity. The weeks following the trial brought a flood of unexpected consequences that revealed just how deep my family's criminal network had reached. As news of the convictions spread, more victims came forward with stories of elaborate scams that Marcus and Sandra had orchestrated over the years. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the case, and I was shocked to discover that my family had been suspected of various schemes for nearly a decade. Business owners reported fake charity solicitations, elderly residents described long-lost relative scams, and former neighbors shared stories of mysterious break-ins that now made perfect sense. Your mother was like a criminal mastermind hiding in plain sight. Detective Morrison from the fraud unit explained during a follow-up interview. She cultivated this image of a struggling single mother while running multiple sophisticated cons. We have evidence linking her to at least 47 separate incidents over 8 years. The financial restitution hearings revealed the true scope of their crimes. Marcus and Sandra had stolen over $800,000 from victims across multiple states. Many of the victims were elderly or vulnerable people who had trusted them because of Sandra's polished presentation and fake charity credentials. One victim, an elderly man named Robert Chen, attended the hearing to give a victim impact statement. His story broke my heart and made me realize how lucky I had been to escape when I did. They convinced me that my late wife had a secret daughter who needed money for cancer treatment. He testified with shaking hands. I gave them my entire retirement savings because I thought I was helping family. Sandra Thompson sat in my living room and cried fake tears while she stole my future. The weight of being related to people capable of such cruelty was overwhelming. I found myself apologizing to victims, even though I had been a target myself. The guilt was irrational but persistent. These were people who shared my DNA, and their actions felt like a stain on my identity. But the most disturbing revelation came from Amanda Rodriguez's continued cooperation with investigators. During her debriefing sessions, she revealed that Marcus had been planning to escalate his tactics against me far beyond simple harassment. He had detailed plans for identity theft, credit destruction, and even workplace sabotage. Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit told me during a private briefing, "He was going to impersonate you online, create fake social media profiles to damage your professional reputation, and had already begun researching your coworkers and supervisors." They had found folders on Marcus's computer labeled with my name containing screenshots of my LinkedIn profile, my company's organizational chart, and even photographs of my colleagues that he had somehow obtained. The stalking behavior was far more extensive than anyone had initially realized. Brooklyn, if you had not taken action when you did, they would have destroyed your career and possibly your safety. Agent Chen continued. Marcus had been escalating his behavior patterns with other victims too. We believe he was moving toward violence. The evidence included shopping searches for weapons surveillance equipment and even research into home security systems like the one I had installed. Marcus had been planning what amounted to a campaign of terror designed to force me into compliance with their financial demands. My mother's sentencing hearing provided the final piece of the puzzle about her true nature. The prosecution presented a psychological evaluation that diagnosed her with antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic traits. But what was most revealing was her complete lack of remorse, even when facing 25 years in federal prison. Your Honor, I maintain that I was trying to help my family, Sandra told the judge during her opportunity to speak before sentencing. My daughter abandoned us in our time of need, and we were forced to find alternative solutions. If she had just been a loving daughter, none of this would have been necessary. Even facing decades in prison, she was still trying to blame me for her criminal choices. The judge's response was swift and decisive. Ms. Thompson, in 30 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered such a complete absence of accountability, Judge Martinez stated. You have shown no remorse for the dozens of victims you defrauded, no acknowledgement of the federal laws you broke, and no understanding of the trauma you inflicted on vulnerable people, including your own daughter. Sandra received 28 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 20 years. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years, with Amanda receiving the promised reduced sentence of 3 years due to her cooperation and evidence of coercion. The sentences were longer than I had hoped for, which brought a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt satisfied that justice had been served, but another part grieved for the family relationships that had never really existed. These were not the people I had spent years trying to reconnect with. They were criminals who happened to share my genetics. The civil restitution process was equally revealing. The court ordered them to pay back all stolen funds plus damages and legal fees. Since most of the money had been spent or hidden in offshore accounts that investigators could not fully trace, the actual recovery was limited. But the legal judgment meant that any future assets they acquired would be subject to seizure. More importantly, the court issued a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with me or my known associates. Violation of the order would result in additional federal charges and immediate imprisonment. The media attention brought unexpected support from other victims of family financial abuse. I received hundreds of messages from people who had experienced similar exploitation by relatives. Many shared stories of parents, siblings, or extended family members who had used guilt manipulation and false emergencies to steal money and destroy credit. "Reading about your case gave me the courage to finally report my own brother," one woman wrote. "I thought I was being dramatic, but seeing your story made me realize that financial abuse by family members is a real crime, not just a personal failing." Jessica, who had been dealing with her own guilt throughout the legal process, became a powerful advocate for victims of manipulation. Her experience of being used as an unwitting accomplice helped other friends and family members recognize when they were being exploited for information about potential victims. "The tactics Marcus used on me were so subtle at first," she explained during a victim support group meeting we both attended. "He made me feel like I was helping heal a family, when really I was providing intelligence for a criminal operation." As the immediate aftermath of the trial settled, I realized that this experience had fundamentally changed my understanding of family loyalty and boundaries. The people who had shown up for me during this crisis, Jessica, despite her initial mistake, Patricia, Sarah, Dr. Martinez, and even strangers who had offered support, were more family to me than the people who shared my genetics. 2 years after the trial, I finally felt like I could breathe freely. The legal proceedings were completely finished. My family was safely locked away in federal prison, and I had built a life surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being rather than my bank account. The healing process had not been linear or easy. Even with justice served, I struggled with complex feelings about my identity and family history. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that grieving the family I had never really had was a necessary part of moving forward. "You are not responsible for their choices, Brooklyn," she reminded me during one of our sessions, "but you are responsible for building the life you want going forward." That life looked nothing like what I had imagined growing up. Instead of blood relatives, I was surrounded by chosen family who had proven their loyalty through actions rather than demanding it through guilt. Jessica had worked hard to rebuild our friendship, and our bond was now stronger than ever because it was based on mutual respect and genuine care. The financial recovery process had taken over a year, but the court-ordered restitution meant that I eventually recovered most of my legal expenses. More importantly, the insurance claim for identity theft helped other victims receive compensation for their losses. My career had actually benefited from the experience in unexpected ways. The technical skills I had developed while investigating my family's crimes led to consulting opportunities in cybersecurity and financial fraud prevention. Several companies hired me to help develop better privacy protections for employee financial information. "Your experience gives you insights that most security professionals never develop," my new business partner David explained. "You understand both the technical and psychological aspects of financial exploitation." The consulting work was fulfilling because it felt like turning my traumatic experience into something that could protect other people. Every security system I helped design, every fraud prevention protocol I developed, was a way of ensuring that other families could not be destroyed the way mine had tried to destroy me. Jessica had also found purpose in our shared experience. She became a volunteer counselor for people who had been manipulated into betraying friends or family members. Her understanding of how subtle and persuasive these tactics could be helped others forgive themselves and learn to recognize manipulation in the future. "I used to think I was just naive," she told me over coffee on the 2-year anniversary of Marcus's arrest. "But I have learned that good people are vulnerable to manipulation precisely because they want to believe the best about others. That is not a character flaw. It is what makes us human." And the anniversary also brought news that my mother had been denied early parole consideration. Prison records showed that she had been unable to adapt to incarceration and had been disciplined multiple times for attempting to manipulate other inmates and guards. Some people never changed, no matter what consequences they faced. Marcus, on the other hand, had apparently found religion in prison and was participating in rehabilitation programs. His lawyer had reached out to ask if I would consider a restorative justice meeting, but I declined. I had no desire to provide him with an opportunity for more manipulation, even if his repentance was genuine. The most meaningful development was the family I had built with people who chose to be in my life. Patricia had become like an older sister, always ready with legal advice and fierce protection. Sarah Williams, the private investigator, had become a close friend who understood the importance of safety and boundaries. I had also started dating someone wonderful, a software engineer named Alex who worked for a nonprofit that provided financial literacy education to underserved communities. What I appreciated most about Alex was that they understood my need for privacy and security without taking it personally. "I admire how you turned something horrible into a force for good," Alex told me during a quiet dinner at home. "You could have let what happened make you bitter, but instead you use it to help other people." The relationship felt healthy in ways I had never experienced before. There were no demands for money, no guilt trips about family obligations, and no attempts to access my personal information. Alex respected my boundaries and celebrated my success without trying to claim credit for it. On weekends, our chosen family would gather for dinners that felt like what I had always imagined normal families were supposed to be like. We shared meals, told stories, celebrated each other's achievements, and provided support during difficult times. The love was freely given and genuinely felt. The legal victory had also opened doors for other victims of family financial abuse. I had testified before Congress about the need for stronger privacy protections for tax information and better support for victims of financial exploitation by relatives. The legislation that resulted would help prevent future cases like mine. "Your courage in pursuing justice has made the system safer for everyone," Congresswoman Maria Santos told me after my testimony. "Sometimes individual stories are the catalyst for systemic change." Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that my family's attempt to exploit me had actually led to the most fulfilling period of my life. I had found my true people, discovered meaningful work, and learned to trust my own judgment about relationships. The money they had demanded seemed almost irrelevant now. What they had really wanted was control over my life, and that was something I would never give to anyone again. The financial success I had achieved was just a bonus. The real victory was learning to value myself enough to refuse toxic relationships regardless of genetics. As I sat in my living room surrounded by photos of friends who had become family, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not for what my biological family had put me through, but for the strength I had discovered in myself and the genuine love I had found with people who chose to be in my life. If you have ever dealt with toxic family members who try to exploit your success or manipulate you with guilt about blood loyalty, what was your turning point? How did you find the courage to set boundaries and protect yourself? Drop a comment below sharing your story. So many of us have walked similar paths, and your experience might help someone else find their strength. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming toxic relationships and building the life you deserve. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that family is not just about genetics. It is about the people who show up for you with genuine love and support. Thank you for listening to my family revenge story, and remember, sometimes the greatest victory is not getting even, but getting free. Choose your family wisely, protect your peace fiercely, and never let anyone convince you that you owe them access to your life just because you share DNA. The family you build is often stronger than the one you were born into.